Welcome to another episode of How I'm Building This, where we interview startup founders in the thick of building their startups. We learn from their mistakes and get practical tips to overcoming challenges. Today is an extremely special episode for me personally. This is a founder that I've looked up to, since I met him last year, and I'm really excited to jump in, goes further. Nanda from Aitomatic, thank you so much for joining in. How are you today?
Doing well. Thank you, Pratik, for having me on the podcast. And yes, I know we've had been working together for some time now. So yeah, it's really very enjoyable.
Appreciate it. Thanks so much. Nanda, before we, of course, jump into the business, would love to learn, who's Nanda, where did you grow up, and what really got you into entrepreneurship?
I got it. Okay. Yeah. So I won't tell a very long story about myself. But I was born in India, raised in India. Then I went to did my undergraduate education there in one of the IITs. And during my time there in the early 80s, a lot of the people who were graduating from the IITs at that time actually went to the United States for higher education and better opportunities. And India didn't quite have that opportunity for us at that time.
Sure.
So after graduate school here, I decided to move out to the West Coast with my first job. And interestingly enough, it seems I cannot escape my graduate background. I mean, I was doing a lot of work in artificial intelligence even in the early 80s. And it's been one of those things where people look at you at that time and saying you're an AI guy, and oh, that's exciting. And then there's a period of time in history from the 90s to about 2000s where even if you were an AI guy, you were sort of some disease because AI was shown not to work. So I politely never shared my background that I was an AI guy at that time. And then, of course, in the last 20 years, there's been a resurgence of it. What's my point? I've been in AI for a very long time,
Yeah.
the intersection of data and AI. And I started off as a techie, coding, doing all that usual stuff. And then I think somewhere around, I came to what I call the proverbial glass ceiling in a large company that I'd reached when I reached the middle management, and I felt very frustrated. This was about 10 years into my career. And then the startup bug hit me. I just said, maybe I should just go be part of a smaller startup and figure out what that is. That was
Yeah.
my first foray. And then that ended up actually after 3 years into incredible exit. I was a head of product. I was brought in, felt like the big cheese in this company of 10 people. And ultimately to grow about 30, but all jokes aside, it was, one of the first internet startups at the time, around 97, 98 time frame. And that company was actually acquired by Sun Microsystems. So then I
Amazing.
got the bug. I said, wow, this is really exciting and lucrative. So fast forward, I've been going in and out of large companies and small companies. I've co-founded at least three companies now. Two I've had out of the three, actually four. I've lost count actually these days. uh, but I've had great exits, one to Sun, then a second one to Facebook, and a third one, which was a spectacular failure, great learning lessons from there. And of course, the more recent one with my current co-founder, which
Yeah.
was acquired by Panasonic, and now this is the fifth one we've
Yeah.
yeah, so that's been it. Along the way, I've changed my role. I started off product engineering kind of roles, but more recently in the last decade, it's been more sales and business development, and I enjoy that aspect of it. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, was like a pivotal moment, like growing up, Nanda, where in which you were like, you know what, one day I'm going to start my own thing?
To be honest, I never really had that type of desire when I was growing up. I always, I think your framework of reference and what you want and aspire to do is really guided a lot by the environment. And
Sure.
so growing up in India, I never grew up in an environment where there was a lot of people doing entrepreneurial things. So it was more of a steady job,
Yeah.
something that you go and aspire for. even when I came here for the first 10 years of my career, I never really had that aspiration. But then, Silicon Valley, I've been in Silicon Valley for almost 40 years, ever since I left graduate school. So you could say I've been living in it for a while, and I
Yeah.
saw all these people doing startups, and I said, what is a startup and what does that mean, right? But I never took that step for at least a decade until I reached that, like I said, the proverbial glass ceiling. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I see that. None, of course, that you've had a few successful exits, one which was painful. Would love to learn, based upon all this experience that you've had, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way that you are
Yeah.
implementing today,
Yeah.
your current startup?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are, failures also teach you a lot.
Yeah.
So there's a couple of things that are very important. First is, you know, I think until you really think you actually have a product or a service that your customers want to pay for it, my feeling is you should be very conservative in how you raise money, run the company, act, because a lot of people are investing in you and the idea as a founder, and it's you need to be very responsible how you deal with that capital, whether it's external capital or your own capital. So run lean until you think you've figured out, that yeah, there is value in what you're building and customers want to really take it. That's one big lesson. Second big lesson is don't be wedded to your idea, because when you go out there, especially in new markets, which is what I've had the privilege of being involved in all along, there's a lot of evangelism you have to do. You have to educate the market, you have to
So,
educate your customer. As founders typically have a very long vision, and they are able to see things that a lot of ordinary people cannot see. And in fact, like I tell my wife, being a founder is really being a madman. You're really, you should be in a mental institution, because average people will never do these things, right? So founders have some kind of idea what they think it is, but the market may not be ready for it. So you have to
that's
spend
true.
a lot of time educating. And so until you really are able to really figure out, and what you realize along the way is that your idea changes. You have to adjust it to the market reality. The market also catches up, but you also have to evolve. And sometime they will eventually meet. When you have that, that's when you get successes. So being too rigid is not a good idea.
Sure.
Right? The other aspect of it is in the early stages, what you really need is not, the people who are like super experienced and good at and highly specialized. What you need is what I, euphemistically call franchise players. What I
Hmm.
mean by them is franchise players are really good at what they do, but they're very good in any position you put them in. They can just take a new position and they can just run with it, right? And they're inherently very smart people, and they have a certain specialty and skill set that they're good at, like as a coder or something else. But next day, the company may need them to be a technical salesperson. So
Yep.
they're just perfectly comfortable doing that. That is necessary because the companies go through in the early stages a lot of evolution of changes in direction and requirements and what is needed of folks. And so that's what you need. Resiliency and the
Yeah.
ability to adapt is very important. So these are some lessons. And also from the failure, you should really understand also that raising too much capital too early on some sort of hype is just a recipe for disaster most of the time. Yeah.
That is for sure. Awesome. But Natha, talking about hiring, right?
Yeah.
So you did, mention the franchise players. I'd love to understand, like, what are some of those qualities that you look for?
Yeah.
But most
Yeah.
importantly, how do you assess for those qualities?
Yeah. Okay, good question. Yeah. So um, the number one thing I look for is really, like I said, the ability to, just inherent intelligence. Intelligence should not be confused with a certain being very good at a certain skill, like say sales or
Sure.
marketing or coding, right?
Sure.
Those are two different things. Inherent intelligence is very important. I'll just list the characteristics I look for. There are not too many, but like I think, they're the most important ones. Second is resiliency, right? Like how good are they really in adapting to new situations, right? And third, to me, is actually the skill set that they bring to the table. After all, we need somebody who can write code. And
Yeah,
it's not like you just hire a bunch of smart people and say, okay,
yeah,
let's figure it out. So they go in that order. The resiliency is really so the first part is raw intelligence. Second part is adaptability, resilience, whatever you want to call it. That some people are very rigid in their thinking. And so, yeah, I'm just a coder. I don't like doing all this. So that is nice, but it's really less valuable for a startup
sure.
and less valuable to me. And third is their skill set. Um, the way you test for those and you really look at it is just, really put them in situational problem solving. I think real world problem solving. And my usual interviews in those kind of cases is just saying, hey, here's a situation I'm facing right now with my customer or this. So what would you do in this situation? What advice do you have?
Yeah,
And I really look for how kind of really adaptable and how creative they are in actually working through this, even if they have no idea. Maybe they're a software developer and they're interviewing for a software developer job. That's how I ask this question. The
that's
skill
awesome.
set, of course, there are standard methods of evaluating right now. So that is the easy one. It's the first two that are actually challenging.
That's awesome. Yeah. So that said, though, right? I mean, today, of course, that you chose the contract to hire route, for one of your sales hires. Why did you decide to go contract to hire as
Mhm.
opposed to the traditional,
Yep.
hiring method?
Yeah. So very simple. There's a couple of reasons. One is, I put it from the company perspective. The dynamics of sort of like go to market are still something we are learning, and I don't think we have figured it out. So what that does mean is that, what we are thinking today may be different, 3 months from now, 6 months from now. Remember, I said that part of this is educating the market, learning from the market. So don't be
Sure.
wedded to your idea. So
Sure.
this is one of those use cases and applications where you can't be wedded to this idea. Oh, we just need this enterprise sales guy, right? Or lady.
Yeah.
Um, so do you want some flexibility in that? That's number one. So number two is really that, like on the other side, the product is very early in the market. It takes some time. And really, it takes a certain kind of sales talent or talent to be able to work with that level
Yeah.
of uncertainty and rough edges and really go past it and remove those roadblocks and take no prisoners and actually close the deals. So that is, we need a framework for evaluation. And so that's
True.
why this model works really well. It's not a great model on the long run. Once you think you have reached product market fit, it can be a very good source for entering and hiring new salespeople, but you actually want the experienced ones. You want that shared knowledge being, teaching the
True.
newer ones entering the sales team. This is how you go sell because that institutional knowledge and building that is very important. So, but for right now, this is the right thing. And, in the early stage of the company that we've been at, where, founders are selling, including yours truly, and my firm view is that our positioning and how we tell the story and how customers perceive what we are offering them is evolving and customers are getting better educated. We are getting better at telling the story. And even our story is sort of really evolving as the
Yeah.
market evolves. So there's just a lot of variables at play. And so I do think this is the correct decision for us.
That's fair. But I'd love to jump into the business.
Mhm.
What's the founding story of Aitomatic?
Yeah, very interesting. Yeah, again, this is very funny. So my co-founder Christopher and I, our previous startup was acquired by Panasonic. So we are both AI guys. He has a very similar background, although far more illustrious than mine, educationally and otherwise. And uh, I got introduced to him through Andreessen Horowitz. And so, they said, hey, this is another senior executive, Christopher, he can help you. And so, I got together with him and he said, oh, help me with the market, go to market side of things. Anyway, that company was doing machine learning and AI, which both of us are very familiar with being Silicon Valley guys. So we said, oh, this is great,
Yeah.
tech. And when we went into Panasonic, we quickly realized, the reason Panasonic acquired us is because, so wow, great Silicon Valley executives, great talent, great product, really smart technologists. let's bring them in and help us sort of really come into the modern age. I mean, Panasonic is a 100-year-old consumer brand,
Yeah.
so a lot of different industrial divisions and so on. When we went in, we quickly realized that our idea, what we think as AI, it actually required a lot of data, which is sort of like what people thought about, 5, 6 years ago. And there's no data in industrial companies, not just in Panasonic, but we did enough discussions with people who are Panasonic partners and all that. We quickly realized that, the physical world is really very different from the digital world of
Hmm.
Google or Facebook or any of these
Sure.
guys. And they're in the business of producing physical goods, which is their focus, and high quality, safety, all these concerns. And, collecting IoT data or operational data is really not their core to their business. So that's why they don't do it. So we really began to understand that, we can't really do AI this way.
Mhm.
And so one of the seminal events that actually transpired was along the way is, of course, the evolution and arrival of these transformer technologies. In reality, transformers are nothing more than very deep neural networks. They're very large neural networks, which is really what we were doing actually in the previous startup, but much smaller scale, of course. And one day, Christopher came to me and he said, "You know what? We've been suffering from this idea of implementing AI. The real value in these physical companies is the knowledge that is there, either in people's heads or they are in engineering manuals and engineering documents and design documents, things like that, which, in the physical world, it's all about science and engineering and applied
Really?
chemistry, applied physics, and there's solid understanding of that for the last couple of 100 years. So he was saying, what if we actually, adapted this transformers now, because you can converse with them in natural language, there are all these chatbots are coming out.
Sure.
And we said, like, this is a great way to actually organize knowledge as opposed to struggling to get data, which, does not exist. And another realization that we had actually after having done this within Panasonic is, even in examples where there was a lot of available data, um, all these machine learning algorithms, the traditional AI algorithms, the way they work is that they read the patterns in the data, they compute the patterns, and they kind of understand something. They don't really understand the physical phenomena, but they understand that there's some patterns in there. And most of the time, they just spout back in a new situation if it matches one or more of those patterns. But there's no interpretation.
Got it.
There's no interpretation of it. But in the physical world, without the interpretation, meaning like, oh, that pattern actually means that the compressor is failing, or the ball bearings on this huge, gigantic motor are whining, that means they're probably out of shape. That is implicit knowledge, or that is in
Huh.
the engineering knowledge. Without
Yeah.
that interpretation, most of the time we found that the value of this AI is very poor. There's no value at all, actually. So in order to get that interpretation, we began to understand that domain knowledge was very important to capture and apply. That is what we mean by knowledge, about whether it's scientific or whether it's in people's heads. So that really what triggered us to say, you know what, this is the kind of tech that we can really finally solve problems in industrials and in industrial AI, as we call it, using this type of technology, because we no longer need data. We can actually just have knowledge. And if we actually build all the tooling to capture all this knowledge easily, and built in the surrounding engines that are necessary, that are relevant to industrial context, we may be able to really solve this problem. And we knew that if we can unlock the value,
Sure.
the market opportunity is there.
Is
There's
there?
no
Yeah.
question. So
That's
that's
awesome.
that's really that's really the where it went from. It's not, I mean, I guess the contrasting thing to this is that, we're not, this is not from what you learn at MBA school and saying, oh yeah, study the problem,
Yes.
analyze, do market survey.
Yeah.
No, you start off with a real customer pain point and really understand the situation, and then map that to, what you think you might be able to do with it. Yeah.
That's so cool. Wow.
Mhm.
So on your website, you say solve industrial problems with expert consistency.
Yes.
What's the pain that you are solving, and typically for whom?
Great question. So most of the time when we did when we were at Panasonic and also subsequently, in all our conversations, we fully knew that there is there is no data. So, but even the knowledge, it's very difficult to get because you actually have all these experts who've been there for 20, 30 years who are retiring or churning
Sure.
out, and the company is losing all this knowledge. And it is ultimately their knowledge and their IP, right? Because it's their products. And the most common problems that we were beginning to see there that are really, posing challenges operationally for these companies, really, I would put it into two broad buckets. One is sort of like they're a maker of industrial equipment or they are actually using industrial equipment. Like, when I say a maker, think of it as sort of like one of those huge Caterpillar combines, that
Got
machines
it. Okay.
or automobile stamping equipment, the manufacturer of that. The user of it is actually the assembly line in the car manufacturer, which just stamps the doors and parts and all these things, right?
Sure.
So those people have the single biggest problem is equipment downtime. If that machine goes down, then their production line is stopped or their operations are stopped. Think like, oil well, trying to generate, pull shale oil from the earth and suddenly your equipment stops working. That's money right
Yeah.
there, right? So that's one area. Then there's a completely different contrasting problem that you see in the industrial side, which is we broadly called as yield problems. So this is
Okay.
during manufacturing, you're having defects. There are lots of defects, quality defects, don't conform to tolerances, specs, and when you do that, you have to scrap it because you can't actually use it in some other subsystem at that point. So the numbers are just astounding. The
All right.
global economy for industrials is really about $25 trillion economy, right? And that's
Wow.
the total market size of all the global OEMs and services and industries. 20% of that is lost today from yield problem, manufacturing yield. So there's almost like $5 trillion of lost sales because you can't sell those things. Equipment downtime is another half a trillion dollars, $500 billion of loss annually.
Wow.
So these are just monstrous numbers.
Yep.
And so when we talk about expert consistency, one of the issues is when you use these types of generative AI technologies, we all know that at the end of the day, the generative AI technology is really good at language communication, but it is not and it's very good at understanding you or question or your interaction and pulling on a bank of knowledge and saying, well, I think it may be this.
Sure.
What they are not good at is when you have these types of problems that I described in the industrial context, what they are not good at is really, uh, you know, being able to truthfully give you the correct procedure every single time
Oh,
because they hallucinate, right? And it's a very probabilistic system underneath at the end of the day. It's not a deterministic system. These LLMs and large language models, while they have their benefit, but they also have a downside, and this is one of the biggest downsides.
sure.
Why is this important? If you have a problem with one of your industrial user and you have actually a yield issue, and you have a manufacturing quality problem, you ask something like this AI a entity, what should I do here? It may have access to all the data and it may come up with a recommendation. If that recommendation is not correct, you could literally make your problem worse, or worse,
Absolutely.
you may actually blow up your chemical plant if you make the wrong settings.
Yeah.
So the consequences of incorrectness or wrong answers are actually very severe. It's not, it's not like using Chat GPT and it lies to you and say, ha 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 ha, you laugh it away and then you go and
Yeah.
say, okay, I know it's wrong. Here, it's very serious business.
Absolutely.
So part of that, the way we have fixed that and really addressed it is we actually have implemented what humans normally do, which is very clear problem solving and reasoning frameworks on top of the large language model knowledge. So just like we humans can draw on facts and learnings that we've had from school and undergraduate years and experience, we draw on all those facts and from our experience And then we reason through the new situation. What would I do here? We
Wow.
go through a stepwise thinking, reasoning, and we come up with a conclusion that we think is the most likely answer for this particular situation. And that is really necessary in this context so that we, when there is a procedure, in the system knows about a certain procedure, certain plan, how things
Sure.
should be going through. It is applying that to the T and really following the decision tree based on the current context. What values am I seeing? And then, follows the path. So this is what we call by, we want to have deterministic answers every single time because the cost of failure is very high.
Yeah, I see that.
Yeah,
Wow.
and without that, we just don't think any system really works.
So talking about, I mean, mainly like from like a go-to-market perspective, right?
Yep.
For something that has such a large,
Yep.
uh, you know, as a number like attached to it, you all have gone through like a typical sales-led motion, and now are of course trying out the more traditional product-led, I mean, like motion. What was like the thought process, when you all thought that, hey, now let's perhaps change it because we've tried this out and maybe
Mhm.
this could be the best route.
Mhm. Yeah, I think it goes back to learning. And as I said, like, one of the most important characteristic of our founders is, I said, don't be wedded to your idea,
Yeah,
constantly be learning, right? Humility is number one, necessary. We actually have made the mistakes. I mean, I'm not ashamed to admit it. Um, we actually thought in the beginning that we will just go do, marketing and lead gen and kind of get brands and product-led kind of thing.
yeah,
It really didn't work for us because it was very mature, very early days. Customers were still trying to figure out what this technology is all about. And so pretty quickly we realized that what we need to do is sales led, which is very evangelistic approach to selling, consultative selling with
sure,
customers, helping educate them, trying to create a mapping between what their problem was and what the technology could do for them given its stage, and really getting them comfortable because this is risky stuff from their perspective.
absolutely,
It's
yeah,
because they all work in highly disciplined operational environments, and they all want to innovate and experiment, of course, in this whole push towards digitization that
sure,
is the theme, but they're very risk averse, and so they're very careful. So a product-led growth model just would not work in a situation like that.
I
And
see that.
so um, that's part of the reason, without much hubris, I would say that we've been very successful because the founders here understand the capabilities of the technology, but they also understand the customer's
The
problems.
customers,
And
yeah,
so the ability to create a mapping between the two really builds that comfort for the customer. Okay, I can trust these guys.
yeah,
And they understand my language. They know my problem. I can see how they are building that bridge for me. And so that's kind of how you get the initial trials and build initial successes. So once we saw that pattern, really working, we kind of double down on it and say, okay, you know what, until we really get to a point where the product is pretty cookie cutter and customers are educated enough, they understand the capability, it's going to be sales
it
led.
has to be sales led, yeah,
It has to be sales led. And at some point, I mean, I don't really know whether we'll ever get to a product led point of view or a
okay,
product led growth. What we will get to, though, in my alternative scenario, I think the more likely outcome is that um, we have enough customer successes and logos that people become aware of us,
yeah,
and then they create the pull directly on. They
yes,
come to us and say, "Hey, we heard you. We know you guys are working with X and Y and Z, and we know who they are, and we'd like to try something with you." In fact, I see that happening right now
oh
already
wow,
in the early stages of it. Like, so, and these are not some small companies. I mean, think this is like Johnson Controls, like a global company,
yes,
Honeywell. I mean, these
yeah,
are all like names people understand. So it's starting to happen. I see that happening, but I still think the motion will be more sales led.
more sales led, okay,
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And our product is, requires configuration, knowing a way to know how to test on the right use case. How do you use the tools? It's sort of, I think it's difficult for it to be product led. I mean, and maybe this is the point where I can articulate my hypothesis of what are good, suitable product led growth companies. These are the companies which are purely sort of pure SaaS, or like they're almost like kind of prosumerish, like not consumer web services, but
Understood.
more prosumer. I don't need a lot of overhead. I can just go sign up for a subscription. It's like the ticket price is pretty low,
Yeah.
and I can try it. And if I don't like it, I just churn out or I can just cancel. I think those are where, you can do a lot of product led growth, because you can, understand what drives demand and customer adoption and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
Yeah.
For in our business and the kind of product that we have, it's a very considered sale, because this is a fairly sizable, investment that companies would be making in this. The ROI is clearly there, because I
Yeah.
told you the size of the problems we are solving,
Exactly.
right? Yeah.
That's great. So that said, Ananda, like today, how do customers find out about you?
Yeah. So we are basically doing two things. One is we have been doing a lot of active, mostly I would say awareness building through marketing. And I would say mostly all of it is brand oriented. Like, either we are in important events, we organize all these conferences, my co-founder does a lot of podcasts,
Yep.
and so those are all ways in which we are doing. We are not doing events and other stuff yet at this point. We
Got it.
don't find them that valuable. But that is sort of how we are getting the awareness out there. And then the other side of it is we are doing lead generation on a more account-based basis, because we are actually focusing on a few industrial verticals. We're not trying to be all things to all people.
Yeah.
So that focus helps a lot, because then you can articulate the value proposition very sharply. And I think a lot of it has to do with, go win one island first and really dominate that island. Then you can think of other islands, right?
Yeah.
And so that is the general idea of what we're doing. So the awareness building helps a lot, because then when we talk to a prospect, says, "Oh yeah, I saw your video of your
Fine.
CEO, or and I heard about you guys at this from this event or something like that," and say, "Oh yeah, that's who we are," kind of
That's
thing.
what we
So
are. Yeah.
yeah.
That's great. Nanda, of course, y'all are. I mean, y'all have clearly had success today and continue to have that success. But that said, though, what is the scrappiest story you have while building Aitomatic?
Yeah, this is very interesting. Actually, it's a good question. I'd say that in the prior experiences, I always felt like Christopher and I, there were some people who would do things for us, and we would direct them and stuff like, and we would direct them and so on, as the two founders and, of course, senior guys.
Sure.
But one of the things that we have done differently with this company is that we actually are actively doing a lot of stuff that normally we would get other people to do. So, for example, Christopher still writes code on the
Oh, no
product.
way.
Yeah, apart from raising money and talking to customers, he does less of that. But beyond being the product guy, he actually writes code. He writes specs. He will do orchestrate
Wow.
marketing things for somebody else. I'm doing the same thing completely in the administration, all of the sales, all
Yeah.
of the administration, all of that. I even run the damn payroll for the company, and I close all the books and everything with the help of a financial person.
Yeah.
So what is the point I'm making, really? The point I'm making is this experience is really, I feel, mandatory for all founders, I think, to do. And I had actually had Jeff Bezos say this to me when I was GM at Amazon, when I used to be there, and I used to see him every 4 or 5 weeks, building a new business for Amazon at that time. He used to say, he had a phrase, which is, he said, like, Amazon leaders know how to operate at every heading. What he
Hmm.
meant by that is they can do the job of a developer all the way to a marketing person, to a senior executive, to the sales guy. And I think the feel of the business is not really, you won't be aware of it until you actually do it yourself. Um, and, a lot of management gurus will talk about, oh, delegate your work and, spend time at the strategic stuff. In reality, what I found is strategy is only 10% of it. 90% of it is really how the hell you execute that strategy. You
Exactly.
could execute it poorly or you could execute it really well.
Yeah.
And the difference in outcomes are very material.
Very different. Yeah.
Okay. So my point is this, right? I think it's required for all founders that they should actually be doing a lot of the work. The scrappy startup they talk about is literally meaning you do whatever is necessary and you do it yourself in
Yeah.
most cases. Apart from being, it gives you a good feel. Now you cannot scale that forever.
Yeah.
And eventually you need to really delegate. But not having that sense, for example, having done founder-led sales for 3 years now, uh, it gives me that much more intelligence and data to make that decision I shared with you, which is I decided I'm going to do more outsourced contract to hire
Yeah.
model because I understand the problem,
Yeah.
right? I done it myself. I know the uncertainty. If I didn't have that wisdom, I would just say, oh, let me hire that,
Yeah.
200K sales guy and fail after 3 months. The failing is not the problem. It's just that the company is now set back by that much time. That is the problem.
That's the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, so that's what I mean. That is scrappy. It's when at some point it's worthwhile to sort of move away from it and do other things. But founders are always going to be required to do various things.
Yeah.
And that's why I said it goes to that first precept I said about hiring, resiliency and franchise players. If founders themselves have to be franchise players, if they can't, why the hell can they expect other people that they hire to, why would they be, right? Yeah.
That's
So
fair.
it's a required characteristic in my opinion.
Nanda, as a founder for so long, I have to ask, what's the biggest piece of BS advice that you've gotten?
What's the biggest piece of BS advice? Um, hmm. The biggest piece of BS advice, I would say, I wanted to reflect because there's been a lot, and uh, it's about who you surround yourself with.
That's
Yeah,
fair. Could you elaborate?
yeah. It's sort of like I've heard everything from, well, you really need a strong operational guy and COO and or this VP of biz dev or these people that I think really are like what you call classic professional managers, things like that. And I think that is absolutely the wrong decision. From what I have learned so far, and it is in fact better for people to grow with the company who are that scrappy kind and eventually grow from within and actually develop them into really good leaders. I think yes, you're always going to hire some people from outside
Of
all the
course.
time, so
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, but the old VC mantra used to be oh, the founders are sort of like at the center and they are like the stars and we need to surround them with all these people who are really the people who actually do real work every day, because the founders are not really it's completely wrong thinking. That's the biggest BS, I would say. And
That's fair.
it's the biggest mistake that entrepreneurs can make.
That's
Yeah.
fair. Nanda, I still
Fortunately,
have. Sorry, go
fortunately, I think that mode of thinking has disappeared actually since like most of the successful companies in the last 15 years are all founder-led companies,
Yeah.
actually. Yeah.
Well, Nanda, I still have so many more questions for you. There's
Yep.
always so much to learn from you. But more than anything else, thank you so much.
Of course.
For this time. Would love to learn how can folks keep up with you and Aitomatic.
Oh, they can just reach me, aitomatic.com. Yeah. Or
Okay.
connect with me on LinkedIn.
On LinkedIn. Well, fair enough. Nanda, once again, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And of course, I look forward to, hopefully having you back once again next year when all this implementation goes as per plan.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Pradeep. Okay, take care.